Hello everybody, welcome back to Art Smart. This is Kevin Hogan. Today I'd like to talk about Horace Horsecollar, the Disney character, and Clarabelle Cow, the Disney character from the 1930s, and why those characters were phased out and other characters like Goofy and Pluto, Donald, what have you, ended up moving forward and being continuous stars. What happened there? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. Disney ultimately didn't need Horace or Clarabelle anymore, and that's the reason why they were faded out. Now, originally in the early part of the 1930s, actually it goes back into 1929, so I should go further back than that. Originally when Clarabelle and Horace Horsecollar were introduced, they were introduced because of two reasons. One, Disney needed to start having other characters to merchandise. While Disney was not 100% sure of how to merchandise his characters and had some stumbles in the beginning, he was a little bit further along than some other cartoon producers and just producers in general in Hollywood when it came to merchandising because of Kay Kamen. Kay Kamen really helped him to make some extra money that helped to keep the studio afloat and be able to spend a lot of money on development. The other reason, though, that Disney had these characters, and probably the most important reason for Disney himself, was that Mickey was less and less useful to him for comedy and storytelling purposes. A lot of people that were watching the Disney cartoons during the early part of the 1930s started criticizing Disney for having Mickey do pretty much anything that was rambunctious, that was inappropriate, that was considered, uncouth. Anything Mickey did that was not a perfect model, role model citizen kind of thing was seen as bad. And people were giving Disney a lot of crap for it, basically, in letters. And so Disney had to continuously pull back Mickey and make him more and more of a just nice guy who would, make positive statements and sing and dance, which is not terribly interesting. So Disney had to find other characters in order to pick up the slack and be able to have negative emotions. Horace was a character that could be angry and do things in anger, which made him more interesting for certain little gags than Mickey. When you look at Clarabelle, she doesn't really have much of a personality, but Disney could insert utter jokes. She was pretty much just there so that she could use her udders to squirt milk and do kind of crass jokes that were related to the farm. People, though, let go of being upset about that because they were secondary characters. As long as Mickey was doing the right thing, people didn't really care. So Disney utilized these characters in order to make his films more interesting and funnier, and to mask the fact that Mickey himself was not terribly interesting. Now, as time went along, though, just better characters came along. You had Pluto, who became Mickey's companion dog, who was interesting in that he was a real dog, cartoon-wise, and they could structure gags of the dog figuring out certain things, interacting with cats, the dog chasing after people. It made for interesting gags. Goofy had a very funny voice and a lackadaisical type of demeanor that they were able to exploit. And then, of course, Donald Duck became just the biggest of the secondary stars that really became Disney's biggest star in the 1940s, because Donald could get angry, he could get upset, he could be frustrated, he could also be an everyman in certain situations, and he was interesting. So by the end of, about 1935, Disney could say to himself, I don't need these other characters, and he didn't. Other studios continued to trot out characters that were not very interesting for a long time, simply because they couldn't come up with anything better. There's a reason why Bimbo and Coco the Clown continued to be with Betty Boop for many years, and that's not because they were interesting. It was that Fleischer couldn't come up with anything better than Betty Boop. That's why Fleischer went out and bought the Popeye characters, simply because they couldn't come up with characters that were any more interesting than Betty Boop. When you look at other studios, you have the same kinds of things. Warner Brothers went with Porky Pig for a long time as their star, simply because he was the best thing that they had created with his stuttering. It took them a while to find any other characters. In the early days, when you have Bosco himself was not a very interesting character, and neither was any of Bosco's friends, like his girlfriend. I forget her name. But anyway, his girlfriend was not interesting, but she was just somebody there so they could structure a cartoon around her. So that's the reason why you don't see Horace Horsecollar or Clarabelle Cow much anymore, and that's because they just weren't that interesting, and more interesting characters were created in their place. Hopefully this explanation makes you a little bit more art smart. You'll come back for more discussion about cartoon characters, and we'll talk a little bit more about fine art too, because I want to make sure we don't get that lost in this channel. Fine art has a lot to do with cartoon art. We'll get into that. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.